Okay, welcome everybody. It's the next episode, the next edition of our roughly monthly webinars that are focused on expedition races, the people and the strategies and the skills needed for Dragon's Back, Cape Wrath Ultra, and Northern Traverse. Tonight, I'm absolutely delighted to have Eleanor Cormack and Vicky Begg from Fit Think with us. They are our sports psychology partners, and they've been offering a kind of sports psychology service to participants to help them kind of maximize their preparations before our big races. Tonight's topic is interesting. We are going to be dealing with or discussing how we deal with setbacks and failure. I think this is so important because over the years, when I have seen participants at our events, I have seen an absolute trend of the participants that deal with the challenges of the race, the uncertainties of the race, the challenges of injuries, the setbacks, etc., that inevitably occur during an event and preparing for it while you're training. The ones that deal with them well are the ones that are ultimately successful. I'm not going to say much this evening. I'm going to sit back and enjoy this. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot as well. Tonight's format is a bit more like a workshop. So get involved, use the chat function, use the Q&A function. If you've got a question, please ask it. My colleague Eleanor, it's actually a bit of an international affair. So my colleague Eleanor, thank you for working on a Thursday night. She's in England, the Lake District. I am currently in Spain. And then Vicky and Eleanor are in Scotland, I believe. Are you both in Scotland? Yes. Brilliant. Yep. So a truly international evening. Right. So at that point, I'm going to hand over. I think Eleanor is going to kick us off. So over to you.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, so plan for this evening, folks, is that I'm going to start us off, run through some of looking at this topic from the point of view of how we think about it and how we approach it like that. And then Vicky's going to pick up on some of the practical elements of planning around that as well. As Shane said, if you've got questions as we go, please chuck them in the chat and we'll try and answer them as best we can, probably at the end, but we'll see if anything comes up as we go along. And it is going to be parts of what we do tonight will be really for you to kind of have a think of at your end as well. So if you've got a pad and a pen handy, that's good to have there just to note down some of your own experiences and how you might work with them as well. Okay, so I'm going to start by sharing my presentation. So as Shane said, yeah, Vicky and I are from Fit Think, which is a collaboration between the two of us. The website's there. There's also a link from the Dragon's Back race site and from Ourea to get to us if you want to have a look at any of the options that are available to people taking part in these events. Okay, so first I have a question for you to have a think about. So think back to a failure or a disappointment or a setback that you've experienced, so something that's happened to you, and have a think about how you reacted to it. So how did you react to it in the moment? How did you feel about it? What thoughts popped into your head? And see if you can note down some of those, because we'll use them later on. And also have a think about, what did you do immediately afterwards or immediately as it happened? And what did you do later on? So this might have been something that happened during training, something that happened during a race event, something that just didn't go to plan. You've got that immediate reaction to it in the moment, and then maybe, you know, at the end of the race or, you know, the next week, the next day, that kind of later on reaction. So just take a little minute to note that down so that you've got that, and we can kind of revisit that as we go along, because it's important to really be able to appreciate and reflect on what happens in these moments for you, and it will be different for everybody. But there's some general principles that we can have a look at. Okay, so ultimately, disappointingly though it is, failure is a requirement for success. So some sort of setback has to happen. You will not get there without it. And a lot of the research in sport in this says that those who succeed at the top level, so if we're talking about successful Olympians, that kind of level, those that get there are the ones that have had a big setback earlier in their career. And the thinking behind this is that that sort of setback is really vital for building up the skills that are needed to have resilience to get to that ultimate success. So if we start looking at failure as a requirement in your training or a requirement in your development, then it takes on a kind of different perspective. So I've got some nice obligatory cheesy quotes here, but they're saying some important things. So this one's about losing. You know, that's the motivation. If you win all the time or if you succeed all the time, where's the motivation to get any better? Okay. That one is very much in the cheesy scale of, you know, the pain you feel today will be the strength you feel tomorrow. But it's reflecting on that idea of being able to use that for a positive purpose further down the line, kind of storing it away. This one is kind of sitting in an Olympic realm, but it's that idea of the ability to lose gracefully, the ability to cope with that and not kind of lose the head and not, you know, when things don't go right, not becoming disrespectful, that kind of side of things. But the final one's the one that I like the best. And it's saying the road to athletic greatness is not marked by perfection, but the ability to constantly overcome adversity and failure. So just think about that for a moment. We're not talking about people who are successful have had this smooth trajectory where they have just been perfect and great all the way along. That's not how you get there. How you get there is having these bumps in the road and being able to get over that, to learn from that, to take that and use it to power them through. So that real idea of it actually being fundamental to getting to be successful. So as I say, it's a little bit disappointing that you can't just say, nope, I'll just choose not to fail. But fundamentally, that's not going to happen. And particularly in these endurance events, you will absolutely have things that go wrong or go not to plan. So it's much more important to know what to do with that and know how to react to it. So you can think back a little bit now to what you wrote down earlier. Okay. What we want to help you to do is understand why you react in certain ways. Okay. So feel free to share this stuff in the chat if you want as well about your own experiences. So what we tend to assume happens is that there'll be an event, an occurrence, something happens. And in this case, we're talking about things that go not to plan. Okay, so a setback happens. So let's say you have an equipment failure, or you make an error with your navigation, or you get an injury, something like that happens. There's a consequence to that. And that consequence tends to be around how we feel about it, how we react to it. So our starting point tends to be that we think something happened, something bad happened, and I felt annoyed, I was sad, I was angry, these kind of emotions come out. I was disappointed, these kind of things. But the way our brains work, that is not what's happening. Okay, we're more complicated than that. What's actually happening is that the event happens. We then apply our own belief to that event. Okay, what do we think about what has just happened? And that leads to the consequence. Okay, and this is what we call ABC thinking. So the A in this sense, you can have it as antecedent if you want a posh word, or you can just have it as an event, which is an easier one to remember. But to give you an example, it would be, so you make a navigational error. If you have a belief that you should be perfect, that your navigation should be perfect, you're going to react much more poorly to that navigational error than if you have a belief that it's okay, I can bounce back. from mistakes, or I knew a mistake would happen at some point. That's okay. I have the ability to cope with this. You know, anything like that is much more useful. It will lead to a different consequence. So rather than you perhaps getting annoyed, getting stressed, which in itself will not help your ability to cope, because your brain doesn't perform as well under stress. You get poorer decision making, your attentional capabilities are a bit off, so you tend to miss things. So if you imagine you're trying to pick up on cues so that you can do better navigation, if your brain fundamentally isn't working as well, that's going to send you into a wee bit of a spiral. Whereas if you have the same event happens, so a navigational error happens, but your belief is, I have this ability to cope with this, you're going to remain calmer. You're therefore going to react to it much better. Okay. So understanding how we process events helps us to then be able to get to a consequence that's more useful, or an outcome. The good thing about this is that we can't control the A. Fundamentally, we can plan as well as we can, but we know that stuff will happen, to put it mildly. Okay, events will happen, unplanned events will happen. We don't directly control the consequence, so we can't decide to be calm. We can't decide to be happy. But what we can do is we can change the belief system. We can change how we think about things, and that then leads to a different consequence. So we do have control over this pathway, but the bit that you want to focus in on is fundamentally that belief system. The way you think will then impact how, what consequence you then have. So you'll get more positive consequences out of that. Okay. In line with this, and thinking about how we think, we want to be as rational as possible. Okay, so rational thinking tends to be more flexible, tends to be more moderate. We don't go to the extremes. So we don't, things aren't terrible, things aren't a disaster. Yeah? And it's logical. Irrational thinking is the opposite. So it's rigid, it's extreme, and it's illogical. So to give you some examples of the kind of 4 types of irrational thinking that are quite common. Okay, so we have demands. Okay, so these tend to be things that include the words must or should. So we're either demanding them of ourselves or we're demanding them of the environment. So it might be something like, I should be better. I should be able to do this. I must complete that. These kinds of things. Common ones that send people into being quite angry are things like sport must be fair. So if somebody else cheats, that is then so conflicting with your belief that you then have quite an extreme reaction to it. The second one is what's called awfulizing. And that's taking something and making it into the worst thing it can be. So it becomes more awful. So example there I've got for you is, you know, if I don't perform well, that will be a disaster. No, it won't be a disaster. The sinking of the Titanic was a disaster. You not performing well might be disappointing, but it's not a disaster. Okay. And that's where we're talking about moderate versus extreme. The third element is low frustration tolerance, and that is I cannot stand it if. So I cannot stand it itis, which is quite hard to say. But the idea of I can't stand it if I don't manage to do my full training. I can't stand it if I don't complete this or I don't place in the top, whatever. Well, fundamentally, you can stand it. So if we're testing our thinking for rationality, no, you can stand it. You don't implode. You know, you might not like it, and that's okay, but you can stand it. And then the fourth one is what's called self-downing, which is kind of what it sounds like, is putting yourself down. Okay. So it's extrapolating from the thing that has happened into what that then means for us. So if I fail to get to the finish, I am a failure. If we test that for logic, it fails. Okay, it means you have failed in that moment or in that event, but it doesn't make you a failure. And that's a fundamental difference. So hopefully you can see here where some of the extreme comes in. and how these beliefs would then influence into how you would then feel about what's happened. So a second question for you then is, do you recognise any of these in your own thinking? Okay, I can see Shane nodding. So it's thinking about, actually, do I say things to myself that would flag up as irrational? Okay. And there's some nice tests you can do on your thinking. So you can look at these 4 things. You can also look at, is it truthful? So if I put this belief in court, would it stand up? You know, is there evidence for it? You can look at, is it helpful? So is holding that belief actually helpful to me at that moment in time? Sometimes a belief will be helpful in one setting, but not in another, and that's okay. And is it logical? So does it logically follow on? And if you apply those 3 things, it's a really simple way to be able to identify where you have irrationality in your beliefs. And we all have some of them, but what you want to do is start to become much more aware of them and start to be able to reframe them into being more rational. And we'll have a little go at that. Okay, so if you think to one of your, maybe look back at what you wrote down initially and see if any of those feel or look like they might be irrational just out, and have a little go at, could you reframe it? And what we're meaning there is, it's not lying, because it should be truthful. It's not about making everything shiny and positive and happy all the time, but it's about reframing it into a way that's more helpful for you. So the example here, the irrational thought would be, I have to be perfect all the time. As a psychologist, if somebody said that to me, I would ask them, why? What happens if you're not? Yeah, because you don't have to be perfect all the time. The world will continue if you're not perfect. You will still exist if you're not perfect. So the have to in that thought is a problem, because it's not truthful. So if we were thinking about trying to replace that with a more rational thought, it could be something like, I would like to be perfect. That's fair, that's truthful. I would like to be perfect all the time, but it's all right to make mistakes. That is a much more flexible thought. It's giving space for imperfection. And given that we know that imperfection is inevitable, you want to have the space for it. Sometimes people are a bit afraid of allowing that in, allowing in the thought that they might not be perfect all the time. And there's a kind of fear that if I let that in, it will make me more likely to not be perfect. But in actual fact, it will make you more likely to perform better, because you're not putting yourself under the pressure of having to be perfect all the time. And also, when you do then have an imperfect moment, you're then able to better bring that into your experience and do something with that. Whereas if you're very black and white, so that rigid thinking of being irrational, that I have to be perfect all the time, if you're not, or when you're not, you have absolutely nowhere to go with that. So it simply is, I'm not perfect, therefore I failed in some way, or I'm a failure. And that's not a helpful thought. So we want to start to replace some of these irrational thoughts, some of the irrationality, with being able to be more rational. And by doing that, you're then able to respond better to what's thrown at you, because you have the flexibility to do that. So we talk about psychological flexibility being a really positive thing as well. And that's that ability. It's that ability to look at what's happening rationally and be able to react to it in a way that's helpful. So you can have a go, those 3 steps there, identifying the thought. So, you know, are there thoughts that pop up a lot for you, or what did you write down earlier? Challenge it. So actually go, if I was looking for evidence for this thought, is it there? Is there evidence for this and against this? And you have to be really quite hard on yourself in that. Don't let things sneak in that aren't factual. So, you know, is it that somebody has said something to you that makes you think that? That sometimes is the case, but that doesn't mean that they were accurate when they said it. So you're really looking at the sort of evidence that, as I say, you know, you do a kind of courtroom thing with it. Would it stand up in court? If not, no, it doesn't count. And then you're looking at, well, actually, if that shows up that it's not, that it's currently an irrational thought, what could you then replace it with that would be more grounded in reality and more helpful to you? And that's where we're aiming to get to when we're looking at how we react to setbacks, whatever that setback is. So the next thing to then do is, well, what do you do with that? So if I'm being rational and I've got the mistakes are okay, what do I then do with the mistake? What do I do with what's happened? And the thing to focus on, or to think about here, is where you focus. So letting go of what's happened in the past is not the same as disregarding it or just completely forgetting it. You can let go of something in the moment. So if you're in the middle of a race or the middle of an event or the middle of a training run, whatever it is, that something happens that you can do nothing about in that moment, then just park it. It's not worth focusing on. It's happened. You can't undo it. It's not worth focusing on at that point. It may well be something to look at when you get to the end of that, when you're reviewing what you've done. You may well at that point want to go, how do I stop that or prevent it, or have the best chance of stopping that happening again? Is that something in planning or whatever? But in the moment, you can't fix it. Just leave it. Absolutely park it. Focus on what you're doing. So that's that choice of where to focus, rather than get inside your head and be just thinking, oh, I wish that hadn't happened. Oh, that's a nightmare. That set me back. None of that is helpful to you. So you consciously want to choose where to focus. And the aim is to focus on the next thing you're doing. So little phrases like what's next can be really good for just kind of snapping you out of the rumination on what's happened. It's okay, that's happened, but what's next? And ideally, you want to look at what's next with optimism. We know that optimism is aligned to performance. So if you look at the next thing you're going to do with optimism, so I'm pretty sure I can still do that. Or, right, what's next? Right, let's crack on. I can carry on, I can do this. Is that's going to give you much better chance to move past the mistake in the moment and get on with what you're doing. Because you don't want one mistake or one setback to then kind of put a black mark across your whole event or your whole training run. If you can accept that the mistake happened and you'll learn from that, you may well in some cases learn that there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. That's learning. But when you're still within that, you want to just leave it and move on to what's the next thing. And then when you get to the end of the race, the training run, whatever it is, you're going, actually, do you have a post-performance routine? So a lot of you might have heard of pre-performance routines, but do you have a post-performance routine as well? And that's where you can then revisit what happened. And Vicky's going to pick up on some more of that, about how to do that. But it's about focusing on what's useful at the right time. And focusing on a mistake that's just happened isn't necessarily useful in the moment. You can come back and revisit that later. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and hand over to Vicky, hopefully, if we can get the technology here.
Yes, hopefully, fingers crossed.
I stop sharing. That should make it so you can press the buttons.
I can share from my end. Fingers crossed this will work, folks. Good evening, everybody. I'm Vicky, the other half of FitThink. Let me give this a shot just now. Now, let me see. I did do this earlier on. Let's go with that. And then let's go with slideshow. Does that work, folks? Is that working? Oh, I can't hear anybody. Yeah, good to go. Okay, so Eleanor left off at the sort of post-performance routine section of our little slide deck, and part of that, I suppose, fits quite nicely in with this idea of if it's a post-performance routine, it might also be, you know, like a review of what your race was like and a review of your preparation. So we've got another lovely cheesy quote in here. To know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge. So it's really just about accepting what you don't know and being open to learning a little bit more from your mistakes, I suppose. So if we begin with the sort of idea of reviewing and reflecting on your event and or your preparation for your event, you've got to take into account both things. Usually what you'll find is that if your preparation went well, your event will actually go quite well. And if you're sort of looking at your review and you're looking at actual things, you're probably wanting to look at things like your physical performance, your psychological performance, you know, how well you coped with things, a bit along the lines of what we're very much talking about tonight, what happened when things didn't go to plan. If you find that if things don't go to plan, you just immediately draw back into yourself, or you pull out of an event, or you decide that's it, game over, then immediately we've got an opportunity there for you to review what it is you're doing with that particular aspect of your planning. In terms of thinking about your preparation before the event, you literally want to look at every aspect that you can possibly think of that went into getting you to the start of the race. And that might begin with when you entered the race, how you booked your accommodation prior to getting to the event. Did you know the travel route to get there? Who was your support team? Were they involved, and were they buying into the whole event with you? And then once you're actually at the event, what went well and what didn't go so well? Were your bags well packed? Did you understand the navigation aspects of the event? Was your nutrition plan in place? Did you follow your nutrition plan? Did you follow your daily plan? Did you follow your evening plan after you'd actually finished running? If you find that there are sort of spaces in there where you didn't actually do the things that you thought you were going to do, then those are really good places to start with your kind of reviewing your competencies and taking responsibility for making some changes. Move on to the next slide. Oh, I've popped in there, learning to self-critique like a pro and seeing the opportunities. So that's almost like taking the hard knocks and being able to see the hard knocks and the critique that you're giving yourself for what it is. It's actually a great opportunity for you to move forwards from these failings or from the setbacks that you've actually experienced and not taking offence at it. Probably also a good idea to have a coach involved in this, or to have your peers involved in this, because they'll probably have some reflections on what you did as well. And it's always worth listening to you know, what other people have got to say about maybe what they saw in your performance. Move on to the next slide. If you have a little think about your kind of responsibility for changing, and then your kind of, I suppose you would almost call it as well, your kind of readiness to change. I've tried to pop in little statements here that are sort of associated with the Dragon's Back race itself. So if you feel as though you're wanting to change, you've got all these wishes and hopes, and you think, yeah, I'll definitely be able to finish the event. I really want to finish this race. You've then got to start putting that sort of in place with what is real about you, what is your ability, and what's your perception of your ability to change. And if you think as though you've maybe got some of the competencies to complete it, then you're probably in a good starting place. If you feel as though you're maybe missing out on one or two things, again, you've got a really good opportunity there in your kind of training schedule, or to talk with your coach and say, oh, I've realised that I don't actually have the skills to navigate properly, or I've realised that my, I don't know, downhill running is really not that great and I'd really like to practice on it. You know, have a little think about the things that are sort of your competencies that are very specific to you, and be really honest with yourself. Think about your reasons for wanting to change. It doesn't have to be about the race itself. I think often people take on challenges which are as they're not necessarily as massive as the Dragon's Back event, but just any challenge. And it's about that sense of, you know, this will really make a difference to me in life in general. It's a great confidence boost. I can see myself carrying this through in my workplace. It'll make me feel better when I'm going out with my friends. You think about the reasons that you've got for changing and wanting to change, and that'll really help you with your preparation for your next event. The next one there is your necessity or your need to change. Often I think, you know, and I put in here a sort of a comment that as we get older, we feel as though we want to be more competent, and we feel as though everybody around about us expects us to be competent. So that sort of sense of, you know, I've really got this necessity to change. I feel obliged to do this. I feel I've got to do it for myself, and I feel I've got to do it because other people are involved in the situation as well. Again, it's another really helpful sort of part of understanding your responsibility for changing. Commitment to change. This is the point where you're really starting to think, what am I actually going to do? And what am I going to book in the next week or in the next month that lets everybody see, lets me see that I'm ready for this change. So you've already signed up for, you know, a new running group, and you're going to sign up for a navigation course, and that's you already on the road to being committed to change. Final stage is actually putting it into place and getting out there and doing it. You've joined the running group, you paid for your place in the navigation course, and you're there next week, and that's you. You're ready to rock and roll. If we're thinking about the next sort of part of it, and that is planning to fail, I really wanted to sort of highlight that Dragon's Back Race has got great partners in Raw Adventures and also Missing Link Coaching in terms of your ability to practice, and to practice failure, but to also practice safely. I think it's super important that while failure is a part of what you're doing, or part of your sort of training and part of your learning, that you feel as though it's in a measured environment, and that you can actually cope with it, that you've got support around you, and that, yeah, you're not going to put yourself at risk. I'll move on to the next slide. You're probably all really familiar with SMART goals, and I don't want to spend too long on this. If you're setting yourself goals, you really want them to be very specific. You want them to have some form of measure, as in, can you see that you've improved? You want them to be achievable, you want them to be realistic, and you want them to be time-based. Tends to fit in with slightly with the measured aspect. I always think it's an interesting exercise to have individuals think about what the SMART goals mean to them. And if you've got different words that might be associated with SMART or smarter, then pop them in there and see what that means, see what happens with that in terms of your own goals and setting your own goals. I've got to admit that when I'm working with clients, I almost always come back to the realistic aspect of goal setting. Something that's specific. Let's say you decide to plan some specific aspects of training around always going trail running. If it's still not realistic, then there's really no point in doing it. If you've not actually got nice trail runs round about you and it takes you 3 hours to get to a trail run, it's not realistic. So the specificity still probably has to be moderated in some way. Really have a think about these little things in terms of how you set your goals, and whether or not you are being honest with yourself, and review them with your coach at the same time. popped in this slide here, which is about self-efficacy, and it's to do with, I've put it in here, it might seem like a big slide, but it's actually to do with the fact that your self-efficacy, and it touches on what Eleanor was talking about, that if you have certain beliefs or beliefs in your ability, when you say to yourself, I've never been that good at this, or I'm just not into that, or I'm not the kind of person who wins these races, then ultimately you're just going to be in a self-fulfilling prophecy, where you're not going to achieve more than you expect to. I think it's also important to think about how confident you are in different contexts. And whilst you might be confident at work or confident at home, confident out in the hills, how do all of those things sort of come together to make you the complete person? And are you able, for example, to transfer some of the confidences that you've got in different contexts into new ones? So look at, for example, how motivated you are to do things, and how much self-initiative you've got, whether or not you put in a lot of effort to make some changes, and whether or not you're committed to keep on trying and keeping on trying to make the changes that you've planned to make. I think it's quite interesting if you look at the other side of that little table and address your sort of low perceptions of your belief in your ability, whether you could put yourself in a sliding scale. So that might be a little exercise for just now as well. You know, for example, if you were to give yourself a sliding scale of 0 to 10, what actually are your beliefs and your ability to, say, for example, complete the hatchling race in 2024? I'll leave you just a second to think about that. Little sliding scale there. So just a reminder, what are your beliefs in your ability to, let's say, complete the hatchling race or to complete the full race? Pop it in a wee sliding scale. Next slide is a little bit to do with self-determination, and this kind of covers again a section on back to competencies. Always competencies involved in there. What are your skill sets? What skills do you need to review? What skills do you need to refresh? Back to that review of your performance, review of your preparation. If you find that you've got lacking areas in competence, it's so easy to then just say, right, I can get help with that. I can get help by going to speak to, it might be Shane, or it might be Eleanor, or it might be friends that you've got. Build up your competence levels. That then gives you a sense of autonomy to then move forwards into the next phase of your training, into the next phase of your racing. The final section, relatedness, again, that's about the kind of support levels that you've got and how you feel as though you fit into the community and the event itself, whether or not you feel as though you're doing it from a sort of separate standpoint, or whether you feel as though you kind of belong to that and that you're buying into the whole thing. So again, I don't know if you could maybe even try and score yourself. If trying to score yourself in all 3 areas seems a bit much for tonight, you can maybe try and score yourself on one of these areas. And I often find myself that I can easily score myself in competencies because I know quite clearly where I'm lacking in competency. Oh, I put in a lovely little gladiators ready. Yay! Ready! Lovely. So last part here is your sort of readiness and your attitude to change. If you've got a really, if you feel ready for change, the likelihood is that you've got a really positive attitude and you're quite motivated for change, and you'll enter into the next phase of your training thinking, super, I'm really excited about this, it's a great opportunity. If you find that you're putting little excuses and little barriers to making those changes. And it might just be little things like, oh, I need to take the dog for a walk tonight instead, or no, I've just not got time for that today, I've got too much on at work. Those little signs in terms of your readiness or your attitude to change help to give you, you know, a little bit of information about whether or not you are ready to make those big changes or small changes. It's always worth thinking to yourself, what is the new me, the new day, or what are these changes going to look and feel like? Because often our sort of expectations of this new version of yourself don't actually involve the change, if you see what I'm saying. So it's almost like you see yourself going into this changed version of events, but you haven't actually seen what that's going to look like in yourself or thought about how that's going to feel. And it can be quite uncomfortable at times, but it's definitely worth giving it a try, putting yourself through that discomfort of trying something new, going and joining in with a new group of people to go running with. Yeah, whatever it happens to be. Finally, if you have hiccups, it's always worth putting a little question in. If this happens, then what happens next? And it's a really simple way of dealing with things because it helps you to sort of put a picture into the scenarios that you're envisaging. So if I fall, then what happens next? It's not likely to be a complete disaster. If I fall, I'll check and see if I'm okay. And then if I'm okay, I can keep moving on. I think that's me at the end of my presentation as well. So I'm going to just come out of that and stop sharing. Right. Are we back?
We're back, yeah.
That was really excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. If anyone has any questions to kind of put in the chat, please do so now. I have a couple of questions as well. Honestly, that was really eye-opening, and I'm sure that's been really helpful for everyone. One of the questions that I had to ask actually is, you mentioned kind of in your SMART goals about one of the things was about goals being realistic. How do you know if your goals are realistic?
If you test them against yourself and against your knowledge, you usually find out quite quickly if they're realistic. For example, you know, what I'd maybe suggested there, the one I'd sort of used an example was, okay, I'm going to go trail running all the time. And then you look at where you live, you'll look outside your back door and you go, I live in the city. I can't go trail running all the time. So all you're doing there is you're measuring your reality against your kind of aspirations. For you to then start bringing them closer together again is then the next stage. So you start working out, when can you go trail running? How often can I go trail running? And is it realistic for me to travel to go trail running X number of times throughout the year, you know, to make this actually happen?
Brilliant. Yeah. Another thing I had to ask is, say you've had a few failures and you're like, right, something needs to change here. How would you begin making these changes to have a better outcome eventually? How would you begin implementing those changes essentially?
I'll go with this, Eleanor, and I'm sure you want to chip in a wee bit as well. So as we sort of mentioned in some of the slides, some of it is just about literally looking at whether or not you first off think that you're ready to deal with the change. So you can have a little look at yourself and say, okay, this is what I usually do. I'm not entirely happy with that because things have gone a little bit wrong and it's not working out for me. So you can either do this on your own or do this with your coach, or with one of us, for example, and say, well, what kind of changes might I be able to make that are actually, as we've just mentioned, that are actually realistic? And you can just write out a little list of what those might be. You know, if you're saying, it depends on what the failure is, of course, you know, or the setback has been. If it's been something fairly practical, like, you know, your navigation skills aren't quite up to scratch, it's really simple to then go out and book yourself onto a navigation course. Once that's done, you're already halfway there. You're already part of the way there. Then you turn up at the navigation course and you're well on the way to implementing those changes. So it's like looking for the I suppose the sort of little corrections and the little fundamental changes that you're going to make.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I've just seen a great question in the chat, if I can jump in as well. That's all right, divert it slightly. Steve has just asked about nerves. He's saying, oh, hang on, it's just disappeared. He's saying that he's never done a multi-day event before. He understands a bit of it set up from volunteering, but he's saying, how would you change nerves into positive thoughts? And I think that's a great question, okay, because there's the element of it of nerves aren't bad, and fundamentally that's the thought. So when we're thinking about that ABC, about our belief, so you've got feeling a bit nervous, or actually it's not even feeling nervous, it's feeling the physical sensations that we associate with nerves. So, you know, clammy palms, butterflies in the stomach, these kind of things, maybe heart rate up a little bit. What you're applying to that is then the belief that, one, that is nerves, and two, that nerves are bad, which is then potentially having that negative impact. Now, if we take that and we say, well, actually, we can do something different with that belief. So there's two things I would say, Steve, for this. One is see how much you can answer some of your questions about the event beforehand. So actually some of the practical stuff, you know, saying, well, I've never done it before. So, you know, can I find out, maybe, can I talk to somebody who has done it? Can I do some of the practice stuff? You know, things like that. Try and get you as many concrete answers as you can. Anything that you can't answer, well, you can't answer it until you do it. You don't know what it's going to be like for you until you do it. Worrying about what it's going to be like for you before you do it is not helpful. So we can put that aside. That's not something to focus on. You can recognise, so you can have a thought of, I would like to know everything about the event before I go into it, but I'm not able to do that. So I'm going to focus on the things I do know. So you're shifting that, making that concern more rational. So you're shifting it more into focusing on the things you do know, the preparation you have done. So if we think about kind of buckets, I do a lot of this when I'm doing client work, by the way, and a lot of analogies. But if we're thinking about buckets, and you have a bucket of all your resources that you're taking into that event. So everything you've done to prepare yourself for it, all your training, everything you know, all the mental resilience you've got, you know, the best snacks, your shoes, whatever. And in the other bucket, you have the demands of the situation. So that's all the things you know are going to be demanding about it. And what you want is this bucket, the resources one, to be fuller than the demands one. And if that's the case, then you're good to go. We know that's better for you. So by finding out as much as you can about the experience, about what it's going to be like, you know, seeing if you can get answers to some of the things that worry you, that's all going into your resources bucket and coming out of your demands bucket. So there's that would be that was a very convoluted way to answer that. But one is think about what your belief is about nerves. So nerves are the same physical sensation as excitement. So if you're saying to yourself, oh, I'm feeling, you know, a bit clammy, you know, heart rate's up. Okay, great. I must be excited and ready to go. That's your belief that changes then what happens. Versus, oh no, I'm nervous. Oh, I never do well when I'm nervous. Oh no, that's it. It's over. Yeah. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is do some of the practical stuff about actually answer some of your questions. Find out as much as you can beforehand. Try stuff out so that you're then from a practical point of view, you've got less to be nervous or excited about. So yeah, sorry, I went off on one there. That happens.
I might just jump in and just say, for the benefit of all customers, potential customers, participants in our events, if you have got a question and you are not sure and it relates to the event, send us a message, pick up the phone. We're totally happy to talk to you about the event anytime. So it's really easy. Literally, you can do live chat, email, phone, just ask.
Yeah, great.
If that's something that's going to help you overcome your nerves, 100% will help.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that's in the resource bucket already, to say, well, actually, if there's things I don't know, I can ask somebody. I now know who to ask. So already by saying that, you're bolstering that for people, which is great.
Right.
I see another question, if I should just carry on with that.
Yeah, go for it. Keep
Andrew
going.
is asking, Andrew's asking, can we say something about the difference between setbacks requiring immediate action, e.g. getting lost, messing up nutrition in a race, versus those with longer reflection time, e.g. a DNF or missing a race due to illness, where you can wallow for a few weeks? You can wallow if you choose to wallow. Vicky, do you want to jump in on this one? And then I'll pick up after.
Sorry, I had the mic off there. What was saying, like, so Andrew / Helen actually. Yeah, so the setbacks requiring immediate action. I think if you are in that environment where something's happened, such as the getting lost, or you've messed up your nutrition, there's usually an opportunity there for you to stop. And we've talked about this previously. I can remember I listened to Reenie's presentation, and when we were talking the last year, if you stop first off and have a stop and think about what's actually going on, then often your initial reaction, Eleanor was talking earlier on about your rational versus irrational thoughts. So your immediate response might be, oh my God, I'm lost, shout and swear, this is a disaster, oh, game over, oh, tragedy. And you've got all that catastrophizing going on, where in reality, if you stop, take a moment to think about it, take a think about where you actually are, whether you've got food on board, you'll probably realise that A, you're not as lost as you think you are, and you've got some resources within you to resolve that situation. And if you don't, you probably have the race support behind you to help you out with that. In terms of your nutrition, probably able to do a little bit of work on kind of improving that by quite simply having something to eat or having something to drink. And again, the stopping aspect really helps you to sort of come to terms with your irrational response. Oh my God, I'm starving. Help. I'm never going to be able to put one foot in front of the other, to actually, if I just stop and have something to eat, I'll be fine. Because it helps to calm all those nerves and sort of thin out. With the longer term sort of post-race reflection and review, I suppose that's where I was sort of talking about things earlier on. You've actually got more time to wallow or to spend time reviewing, and you can do that not only with yourself but with a coach and with other people who are involved in maybe your peer group, the race team. And you can talk about things and talk about the things that you're able to identify as being great aspects of what you did, not such good aspects of what you did, really quite poor aspects of what you did. Honesty in this situation is so important as you move forwards. Without the honesty, it'll be very difficult for you to sort of change what happened this time into then it'll maybe just repeat itself if you don't change your kind of way of dealing with things. I think that what Eleanor spoke about early on to do with your beliefs as well, if you don't believe in yourself or you continue to believe you are still that same version of yourself, it's unlikely that you're going to move forwards into the next event with a more positive outlook.
Yeah, so a fundamental belief underpinning that might be the belief that you can improve, or the belief that you have the ability to learn from what happened. So in that reflection phase, that's really important if you can try and hold on to that. So maybe thinking about other times where you've managed to overcome a hurdle, whether that's in your, kind of race stuff or something entirely unrelated. The principle of getting past something that was difficult is the same, and it transfers. Everybody's had something in their life that was quite hard. So, draw on what you learned from that and say, actually, I dealt with that, so this is easy. That kind of thing. And you kind of building on what Vicky was saying about in the moment as well, is that, yeah, absolutely the pause. Because as I was saying earlier, when something goes wrong and you get slight panic setting off, so your fight or flight reaction has set off, that's not great for kind of executive functioning. So the complicated stuff that our brain does, it's designed just to help you to run away from lions. Don't think there's any in where the races are, but I don't know, whales, dragons, that sort of thing. But fundamentally, you don't need to be able to run away from a dragon. What you need to be able to do is stop, take a breath, let your brain calm down, and then look at where you are. And that's where that decision on what to focus on, the what next, right? What do I need to do? Do I need to get my map out and have a good think? Do I need to eat something? Do I need to do both of those things? What is it? But if you understand what your brain is likely to do in those circumstances, it then means that you can stop it before it kind of runs away in its panic mode. You can actually go, oh, I see what's happening here. Hang on. Let me take some breaths. Let me just pause, calm everything down. Right. Where am I? What's happening? What do I need to do? Because you've got the tools to answer all those questions, because you've prepped yourself for the race. The only thing that will stop you being able to make the right decision is if your brain's not fully functioning at that moment. So it's that kind of balance. And then the longer term reflection, the key thing, I think, from there is make sure you are recognizing what you did well. So we have a tendency where again, our kind of monkey brains have a tendency to focus on the negatives, because they tend to be more dangerous. The time you almost got eaten by the lion. But if you can make sure you spend some time with what went well, how am I going to make that happen again, or make that happen more? So don't just focus on the bits that didn't go so well, because that's all learning.
If I can just add a little insight as well, I think for the participants, when they have those moments of near failure or disaster on the course, the thing that I would always say to anybody is just eat something. It's so much easier to make a good decision if you've got some sugar going to your brain. So you can then make good decisions. But if you feel that impending disaster moment, eat is my first advice.
I think that's great advice just for life in general, probably.
Life in general. If you're feeling grumpy, you probably just need to eat.
Yeah.
I've got an interesting question here, actually. What 3 words would you say to yourself if you're on the brink of DNFing or not finishing an event? I guess that's quite personal, so I'd be interested to hear both of your opinions on that.
One step forward.
One step forward. That's a good one.
I think I would tend to go down the route. Again, it is a personal thing, but what I would say is tend to just say it's okay. If I can have a hyphenated one, or it is okay. Because again, it takes that pressure off. You can then decide what you want to do. Rather than being, because if we're worried about not finishing, what we're doing there is worrying about an imagined future that we don't know that it will happen. And we're putting our efforts into imagining that. So it's the flip side of worrying about something that happened in the past that you can't change, is worrying about something in the future that hasn't happened yet. Whereas if you can kind of say to yourself, it's okay. Right. What am I doing? Again, it's that kind of, balance between those two.
Another idea that I would have there, it's not quite the 3 words idea, but I actually read a little article at lunchtime, and it was a young man. Some of you will probably know of him, a chap called Tom Evans, and he imagines himself being part of the story and being part of the completion of the event, and he kind of creates that full visualization of, I am here, I'm here now, this is what's happening. So a bit like what Eleanor Cormack is saying there, is that you're not necessarily thinking of these not quite real thoughts, which are the advanced thoughts, the future thoughts. They don't really exist yet. They're just your imaginings. They don't really exist. What exists is the here and now. So the here and now being part of the day and part of the story and part of what's happening to you can really help with that process of getting you to the finish line. That one step forward is literally that. It's another step closer to the finish line.
Yeah. And I sometimes, you know, it's useful to have little phrases that kind of make you smile a bit in those situations as well. That can be quite helpful. So I'm not at the running big massive races side of things, but I piddle about. And when I find it tough, I tend to just say to myself, just keep running. But in my head, it's the fish in Finding Nemo, you know, the just keep swimming fish that's doing it.
Yeah.
So it goes, just keep running, just keep running. And that makes me laugh and makes it a little bit lighter and equally keeps me running. So, you know, that's just my brain. It's just a bit odd sometimes. But it's having something like that that's got a little mental image to it as well, because it's a great distraction tool at the same time from, you know, if you're, you know, if you have, you know, you are maybe in a little bit of pain at that point or something, you know, actually it brings you into the present moment in terms of just keep running. And then, but it also has that little distraction, a little lightheartedness. It just relaxes you. And doing any physical exertion when you're more relaxed tends to be easier rather than being all stressed out about it. But yeah, I have a little fish in my head. So.
That's brilliant. I just want to say it's been really great. Everyone's been really engaged with the chat this evening. I think that's all the questions that I've got at the moment. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Shane.
Sorry, Vicky, did you have a question
Yeah,
there?
I actually had one that I was
Vicky,
going to put,
go for it.
I was actually going to put to Eleanor as well, and it was along the lines of the irrational thoughts, and it's that sort of sense of that personal belief, the I've always been like this, I've always done things like this is just the way I am, I can't be anything other than this. You know, I think that's probably one of my sort of irrational places that I probably struggle with, you know. Oh, I can't, I know I'll never get over that hill in front of my friends because they're just faster than me. You know, I'm interested to find out if I've got it in me to try and overcome that.
Well, of course you do.
That would be a question. That would be a question that I would put.
But yeah, so yeah, anything that has a good identifier for that type of rationality. You know, if you're saying I always or I never, well, we don't never ever do things, and we don't always do things either. You know, so there's the kind of two things going on there. There's one is the factual nature of it or not. So, you know, I always come last. Do you? No. Even if you have always come last, that doesn't mean you always will come last. So the logical nature of it is flawed there as well. So the logical nature of I've never managed to beat my friends up the hill, therefore I never will. That's flawed logic. That's illogical. That doesn't follow. That just means I have never beaten my friends up the hill. Yet. Yeah. So there's those kind of ones where you start to go, you know, even if I mean, it's a great word, yet. And you use it, I use it with kids as well, you know, it's a great one for if you stick yet on the end of any of these sentences, suddenly you go, oh, that opens up a possibility that I might be able to do that, you know. So you might take something like, you know, I never beat them up the hill. So, okay, I haven't beaten them up the hill. I would like to beat them up the hill. I haven't done it yet, but I've been really working on my hill running, or I've been working on my fitness or whatever. But ultimately, you might also ask yourself, do I need to beat them up the hill? Or are they just physically stronger than me at the moment, and that's okay. Because am I trying to beat them, or am I just trying to do my best, which might be completely separate? So there's quite a few things in a little sentence like that that can be kind of, you're sort of handicapping yourself a little bit when you say stuff like that, because you're taking away the possibility of success, but you're also making that, you know, the need to beat somebody or the need to be better. So we're then getting into those must and should type of beliefs. You know, I should be able to beat them. Why should you? Give me a good reason why you should. You know, and that's where people, when you start asking yourself questions like that, if you're asking yourself why should you and you can't answer it, it's because the should is wrong. You know, I would like to beat them, but nothing says that I have to, or I should, or I must. Yeah, and one day I might, and that'll be great, and then I'll be really smug. You know, so it's yeah. There's quite a lot in little sentences like that, but you can pick it apart, and that's where the rationality comes in. And that's why the test, the sort of 3 tests of is it truthful, is there evidence, and is it helpful, is a really good one to apply to any of these things, because it's simple to apply, and you can almost tick box it. You know, if you write down your belief and then go, does it pass the test? If it doesn't, it's no use to me. I need to turn it into something else. Yeah.
I think Eleanor has illustrated brilliantly in the last couple of minutes why genuinely expert advice is so insightful and useful when you start to break down your challenges, and it might be coaching or nutrition or your psychological approach to racing and events, but it's fantastic to listen to experts who really understand what's going on. I think we've kind of reached probably a natural end. We've answered all the questions. It's been as my colleague Eleanor said, brilliant, really engaged group of participants watching tonight. I'm left with a thought for maybe a future webinar, and this is what I call the dark arts of psychology, and how you use that to undermine your competition in an event.
Couldn't possibly.
I've got some good stories to share, but maybe for another time. I've really enjoyed that, and I've learned so much. It's absolutely fantastic. So I would like to say a big thank you to Eleanor Cormack and Vicky Begg for their time and expertise this evening, to my colleague Eleanor, who's been working from home on a Thursday night and not out running up hills, which I know she would much prefer to do. So thanks everybody for listening. I'm afraid the webinar comes to quite an abrupt end as we hit close finish. So please accept my thanks for coming. Hopefully we will see you at one of our events, and I'll maybe finish by saying you will never really know what you can do at these events unless you turn up, and I'm constantly amazed by how awesome people are when they set their mind to a big goal like Dragon's Back or Cape Wrath. So thanks everybody, good night, and we will hopefully see you at an event. Okay,
Thank
cheers.
you. Thanks. Bye now. Bye bye.